I think about you young scientists who are in the audience, and let me tell you how I think this has great connection to you. Because here we are in a moment where this nation is, yes, we've heard it's in chaos, but as Brother Sledge tells us, we can come out of chaos and come into something that is much more like community. And it takes the scientists sometimes to bring us there. And he said, how does the scientist bring us there? You know what I'm excited about? I'm excited about somebody in science and technology and engineering to come up with a good voting machine, because voting rights are being—
oh Lord, he's going there.
I want
he's going there
to come up with something that says this is proof positive that there is no election fraud. And it couldn't have been election fraud because the scientists came up with this particular object. See, you have a role to play in this whole thing of civil rights. See, you see folks like myself, we're still trying to figure out how to tell somebody to tell them about the dream. But what you can do is you can go on to actually create something that we will use from now on, because the chaos that we're in is because if somebody says something was stolen from me, like an election, and we have nothing to work with that with, then we go through all these hoops and things. But think about if you came up with something that was so airtight that that kind of argument couldn't come forward. I'm just saying we all have a role. So don't think you don't have a role in all this. We all have a role. And I want to say use what you have so that we can all get what we want. I'm sorry, did I go off the wrong way, Sister Tina?
That's okay. But you know what? This is what Dr. King does to us, right? And those that have had lived experiences in various environments, and where we are today and how we're pushing the needle, we have to let's start with the past, right? So James talked a little bit about the king in which resonates for today, which is being very bullish about economic drive. You can't have an economic drive without looking at the individual people and the communities and where they are. That also ties to a lot of the institutions, policies that have been created and garnered over time that has helped to propel or not certain groups of people. And when we talk about the evolution of education and just the whole economy, we go back to just the beginning portion of the book. And for those, again, I implore you, if you can't pick the book up, try to get the Audible to listen to it, because there's so much about what he wrote. It is so applicable for today. You would think that he actually wrote the book today. And it ties to STEM. It ties to everything that we're pushing and making sure that we're garnering elements that can propel technology in a different way, but also have different groups of people to participate in it. But when we look at the major priorities and what he was talking about, that still applies today, going back to even the communities that have been created, post-slavery. Now you have minorities that are able to work in the factories, and you're pushing them you're pushing the economy to actually develop ways in which now African Americans now can be included in a system where they can get disposable income. Walk us through how the evolution of technology has changed, how voting has changed, but also looking at the economy, what was happening between the government created and developed communities to now the development of FHA for suburbs and how that impacted minorities. I know that's a whole lot right there, but I think you see where I'm going. The different evolution. I see we have some questions as well, but if you all can talk about that. I'll start with you, James.
So interesting. I saw this, we think about
I always like to make these connections to things that are happening. And I always say, things don't happen independently without having some cause. There's this relationship. And once we start to, uncover it and pull back the layers, we start seeing what has happened. So I watched this piece recently about Ferguson. And we all remember the death of Michael Brown and the response to that. And it was actually Cheryl and Eiffel, who was talking about, and the Economic Policy Institute started to really look at, it just really gets into it because we start to look at the role of white supremacy. And they didn't talk about critical race theory at that time, but it was just the role of white supremacy because, as you mentioned, FHA funded, at that time, like over 80% of the mortgages in this country, like if we start talking about like 40s, 50s, around there. But they did not guarantee mortgages for Black people. They also, because of laws around, restrictive covenants, Black people were relegated to live in certain communities, and they would not fund projects for them in other places. So we ended up in segregate, like the country, because of policies, supported segregation. It was through these restrictive covenants. It was through redlining. It was through not allowing developers, and even, one of the things that, it was actually written into the FHA law that you could, or their policies, that you could not fund, you could not fund, that these communities were designated for those of a certain race, and you could not fund any projects that did not support that particular group. Like it was written as part of policy. So that's what we deal with now. So that moved. So that's the part of King that moved later into starting to think about this whole idea of what do we get in terms of economic policy, and really I started to draw parallels, because in the book, one of the things he mentions is that he had done speeches all over the world, but he went to deliver a speech in Chicago. I think you may remember this. And he said in the book that there were youth there he was booed. And where he went was to this really personal space, this emotional space that made him sort of ask him, kind of an arrogant place, as he calls it, like of thinking like, I've been in this movement for 12 years. I've given my life. I've neglected my family. I've done all of this to support change in this country. And then I get booed. And not only that, he was booed by Black people. So young Black people. But it really made him think about the promises that had always been made, but there was not any tangible evidence in their eyes of what had been done. Like they couldn't concretize what had been done. However, it made me think about the parallels. Like we were talking about South Africa earlier, and older South Africans, of course, really hold Mandela to this reverential place, hold him in this reverential place, which he should be. I'm not saying that at all. But it's interesting that younger people always ask the question, always say, well, we got the government, but we didn't, but unemployment is still really high. We don't own a lot here. We're still struggling financially. We have really poor and impoverished communities, and we don't see where that change came. And so that's where I start to see like ways that we have to look at, part of oppression. One of the tenets of it is violence, and not always violence in terms of physical violence, but I call it economic violence that has been inflicted upon groups of people. And Tina, I think you're asking me something, maybe. You're on mute.
I didn't realize I was on mute, but if I can interject real quick, I think you're hitting on some really good points. And if you not that I'm pushing or promoting the book, I'm not. I just think it's something that is so eye-opening. But in chapter 4, it leads to a lot of things that you're talking about, where you have justice system in itself. When you're looking at how much the government has funded non-Black communities from an education standpoint per pupil, right? It's anywhere from $450 at the time. So this is in the 60s, it was $450 up to, I think, $900 per student. For African Americans at the time, it was less than $300. So when you're talking about just the chaos, it starts to happen over time because you're having insufficient funds that's being invested in community. That in and of itself also promotes the inequities. But I want to get Dr. Slaughter in here as well for reaction. And then there's also a question as well, talking about the critical race theory, which we absolutely will get to also. So I thank you for posting that question. But Dr. Slaughter.
I'm just so glad to get in, and I think your insights are outstanding. But let me just also put in place that this book is outstanding around King. There's another one that he did called Trumpet of Conscience, which is just, I mean, it addresses Black Lives Matter in its own way. It addresses the Me Too movement in its own way. I mean, it's just like it just shows you how, as hard as Dr. King worked and left and died, we still are in a similar place that we were before. And that's what bothers me. So I'm thinking, gosh, it would discourage you from losing your life, doing things to lose your life, because you say, in 50 years, are they going to be saying the same things that they're saying now? So that's something I have some concerns about. And I just want to make sure that when we have, I think when we talk about all of this information, we really get very close to, I think, one of the things that is so frightening in people's minds about what critical race theory is. Because I think people are so nervous about people feeling bad about the history of this country. And honestly, I say the people who were the perpetrators of the malfeasance, they didn't feel bad when they were doing it, and think about how badly the people who were the recipients felt. So I'm saying it's all right to feel uncomfortable. Just know that this is the history. This is the history, and it's nothing to feel badly about. It's something to even look forward and say, let's not let anything like that happen again. So when we see things like people's voting rights being taken away, when we see opportunities being snatched away from communities, we just have to say, oh, no, we cannot let that happen, because we're going right back down a road that we thought we had gotten off of. The real spokesperson for critical race theory, Kimberly Crenshaw, one of the things that she uses as an analogy is this whole notion that at one point, buildings used to be built with asbestos, because asbestos was a fire retardant, and people thought this was a good thing. Well, at some point, they found out that asbestos was actually dangerous for us. So even though people thought they were doing a good thing, they were using something that was not good to deal with it. So so her analogy with the asbestos in the buildings is to say, folks, let's get rid of this asbestos because it's killing us. And people were saying, well, but at the time asbestos was done, it was the best thing that could be done. We should probably leave asbestos alone. And you have to ask yourself, even though it's killing us, we should continue to be in a building. Why don't we address this asbestos? And it's almost as if people would, and I love talking to scientists because I know scientists can come up with something else, right? The thing is, when you think about asbestos needs to be cleared out of the buildings and something else can be put in place, right? So let's not try to sweep it under the rug. Let's try to not talk about it because the asbestos is still there. Racism is the same way. Let's not try to sweep it away and act as if it doesn't exist. You know what? It's still there. And it's nothing to be embarrassed about.
Right.
Because, asbestos was in the building. Guess what? We work to clean it out. And that's the thing that is really the thing that I think we should be focusing
similar
on.
to Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. But if no one is there to hold that mirror up, then how do you know that you actually have a sty in your eye?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And I think that's key. And I think that Dr. King would be very proud to know that we were actually addressing this issue with the hope of really getting rid of the junk that we've got to deal with. And you know what? If we don't face it, we'll never get to it. So for anybody who is concerned about, will people feel badly? So, you know what?
It's not about the feeling. It's about understanding what has happened so we don't repeat.
Absolutely. That's exactly
yes. Right. James, do you want to comment on CRT?
Well, yeah, I think Dennis, gave really.
Well, let me ask it. Yeah,
but
I do, and I would like for you to also address this with the work that you're doing in Africa. How does that come up, and how is it addressed, or if it's even an issue?
Yeah, King said, and I wrote this down. It was one of the things that I remember. I appreciate words, and in true expression of thought. And one of the things he said, and on page 141, he said, there is a need for radical restructuring of the architecture of American society. And those words resonated with me because it was, and I thought about it with Dennis talking about the building. And so when I started thinking, like he said, architecture, because it is really it's foundational of who we are. And when we don't, like if you start thinking about, Maslow, that's who we are. Like there's this basic need for us to address this inequality that we face in this country that has grown out of racism. And he talked about those three things of, it was racism, it was poverty, and it was militarism. And he said, it was that trio that is really rooted in the evils of American society. And one of the, it was in, I continue to write down things. It was
so James, you have so much that you want to say. It's like I can see it.
Talk about the founding fathers of the country, because we always go back to this America. If you don't want to be here, then you leave this country. Okay, let's have
because he talked about the ambivalence of he talked about the ambivalence of Thomas Jefferson.
He did, and he said they were enmeshed in that in the ethos of slavery and white supremacy. That's what he wrote. And he even talked about, like, they never really knew even how to deal with it, because you had, George Washington at the time of his death owned like over 160 enslaved people. Yeah. And he was a fourth generation slave owner. Like how do you so that's when I started talking about foundation, like at the very foundational level. So it's really difficult to have a conversation about America and what America is, who America is, without acknowledging that at the foundational level, this is who we are. Now, you talk about making these connections to Africa. A lot of the work that I do, particularly, is in labor, but it's also particularly I think about like Kenya, the work I do there. A lot of that work is in the informal sector. There are over 80% of the jobs in Kenya are informal. And so it was a really difficult time during COVID because I work with people who have to go to markets to sell their goods. And if they can't get there, then they can't eat. It's just, it's just the reality of where we are. But then you start to look at corporations, you start to look at the land itself and how the land is being raped, the land is being pillaged, and they don't receive the benefits of that because it all ties back to this wealth inequality, this this greed. I talk about corporate greed and how and power in terms of how we look at it. I remember during the fight, it was really he started to talk about, and we can get more into this, but how the importance of looking at power and not having that connection to the people, because power without love is reckless and abusive. But he also said love without power is sentimental and anemic. And that's the difference in those who the oppressor versus the oppressed, because the oppressor always thinks about how to amass more power, and they do it without love, and it becomes reckless and abusive to groups of people, which we live. And then those who have been oppressed, we always reach out with love because that's what we were missing. But we don't fight for that power. And when we don't fight for that, it's just anemic. It means nothing.
I think that is fantastic. So when you start to look at, and just to let you all know, we are live on YouTube and we have 15 minutes left. You see, it moves so quickly. When you think about what King wrote based on his years of living, writing this book in 1964, where we are presently, and I'll go around to each one of you. What do you think are some of the pivotal points and changes that we're seeing in minority groups? Again, education, definitely focus around STEM, the technology, and our ability of participation. Where do you see us now? And what do you think are some keys that's needed, some key actions that's needed, whether it's public policy, the institutional component, the systems that we would, various groups of color would need to create in order to make sure that there's a change and a shift? What three actions do you think we need to think about and or do? Either of the two can start.
I think I want to start with certainly doing everything we can to educate ourselves. So I think education is the first key. And when I talk about that education, and I'm going to say this very briefly because I know we're out of time. If someone said something, told me about somebody who had committed a crime, and I knew I had nothing to do with that crime, all I could do is just listen to that and sort of learn from it. It's nothing for me to feel guilty about unless I've done something. So if people haven't done anything, they shouldn't mind learning about something without some sort of feeling of guilt. And if they've got some guilt, then maybe a shoe is fitting that should be worn. The next thing that I think about once we educate ourselves is I think we need to be in groups of get with groups of people who can be supportive of who we are. Like the things that we have to work through, we need somebody to help us talk through things. And then another group that I would be with is groups of people who need to hear the message, but are not necessarily in a place to hear the message. And I think one of the great things that I like is just, as you may know, since we've all got cell phones and the cell phones have face recognition on them. One of the things that happened in MIT Creation Lab, a young African-American woman said, wait a minute, it's interesting that Black faces keep getting mistakes on them. So, oh, you know what? They hadn't set it in the rhythms for darker skin. So she had to put that in place. Now look at without doing anything crazy, knowing that Black folks are, or darker skinned people are clients who purchased this thing. Don't you want it to be the best it can possibly be? So you have to do something like that. So when people invite us to be a part of creative teams and so forth, I'm going to say, particularly, make sure that there's some diversity in there and make sure that you get yourself in there, because people need everybody. So diversity is very important. So I'm saying, educate yourself, get with communities of people who can support you, but also make sure that you're in places where you can get that voice out there without it feeling like you're doing something that's outside of what people want to do to get better.
Absolutely, which is so critical as to the reason why, here at Heritage, we want to make sure, look, the organization is open for everyone, but we want to make sure that you have a different lens in how you need to look at any technology that you're going to be creating, any business around that technology that you're going to be developing. How does it morph and go into different economies, right? That's where the intellectual curiosity come into play. It's not just solely around the interest of the output of a technology or an asset, but how are you curious about how other groups of people live and would use it, and understanding their uses? It actually makes you more open to more equitable product services in a community, and it opens your heart. James, same question to you.
Yeah, so I think it's great. Dennis mentioned education's important. I always talk about this concept of power. I'm in labor, so I have to talk about power, and that and why power is important. And I think for us, often we think of power as a negative thing because we've experienced power over others. And we've not had that experience of power with other people to achieve something, or the power to do something. But our experience has been historically through power over us, and that's why we make that connection to it in a very negative way. I think we have to have courageous conversations in this country, and courageous conversations, I mean, in terms of being really honest with each other. I think we missed a grand opportunity, grand teachable moment last week with Whoopi Goldberg and her characterization.
It's a very good point to bring up.
Her characterization as in talking about, in saying that the annihilation of the Jewish population was just man's inhumanity to man, and rather than, and we seek to punish in those cases. We seek punitive actions rather than having those teachable moments, because we can always learn. Learning is lifelong. It doesn't matter she's 60 something, she can learn something, and as all of us can. I think we always have to reach back. We always have to use mentorship opportunities to help others understand. We have to, because we talk about dismantling systems, but we have to help others, those who are coming on, understand why we need to build systems that support others, and talk about why the systems that are in place are not working, and they haven't worked, and help people understand that larger view. And I always talk about the connection to the world. I think we live in our small spaces and we see the world rather myopically, because this is what happens here. And I think we have to start looking at the world through a global lens, rather than and as a global society, because looking at how systems have affected everyone and all of us, rather than being so only connected in my small space of the world. But you have to see this connection. And the last thing is, read all the banned books that you can find. Read everything that's banned.
I see you pushing the envelope and being very provocative. I love it. Yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly. There is a question, and if I may ask, Maddie, can you come off of mute and video so you can ask your questions to these two powerhouses? And Maddie is also one of our ambassadors.
All right.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
And a black belt, by the way, so don't mess with her.
All right. Good morning, Maddie. All right, it's good to see you.
So I was wondering if either of you have any tips or suggestions on how the youth of our society can educate ourselves, and then use that knowledge and other knowledge that we may have already to take a stand against some of the chaos and unfairness of our world and the views that society puts on us at a young age. As I feel like the people who teach us lived in an age where things were very, very different from how they are now. And now with all of this change, our youth is being exposed to new things that even our teachers, our parents, they don't quite grasp or have an understanding of. So I was wondering how someone at my age could maybe take a stand against that and help myself and my peers.
Take it away, Sledge. You're muted though, brother. Okay.
Oh, I was pitching to you because I just finished speaking. I was letting you start. You want to start?
Okay. One of the great things about young people and the older people working together, older people often bring a certain wisdom and young people bring a certain energy. And if you get the energy and the wisdom together, then that's usually a good thing. So I would say some of it is going to be you working with groups of people who are, let's say, a little older than you, and people who are at your same age. So you all can come together to talk about how is the wisdom that you all can bring something that can inform us with our energy so that we can do kind of the right thing. So that's where I would start. And I would take something like Dr. King's book here. I'd also like to think that you could take his Trumpet of Conscience. I'd love for you to read his letter from a Birmingham jail. I think you just read,
that is a very good one.
I think to sit and listen to, and his whole thesis in that is why we can't wait. Why are you asking us to wait? And how much longer can we wait? We waited 400 years, really? So I think the thing that we want to do in this is, I think there are older folks who are discussing these things, and there are younger folks who are discussing these things. And I'm saying that I'd love for to see folks to come together and discuss together.
James, you have anything?
Yeah, that was great, Slaughter. I think about as you mentioned, organizations that you can start, because you can just sit around with a group of people and just ask that question initially, like, what is it that we can do? And pose that question. And as Laura said, you have all the energy, you're creative, and you can have those ideas. And then I like the idea that he mentioned of having this intergenerational connection to movements. And then always, and I'll talk about that in just a second with King, again, in terms of talking about intergenerational movements. But I want to say this while I'm thinking about it. And I always say, continue to ask the proverbial question of why, particularly as students. And I used to teach. That was my very first job. Like after I graduated from North Carolina Central, I started teaching. And I would always encourage my students to not just ask me, but all of the teachers, why? Why is it that you teach me this? Why is it that we study this? And there were so many things that they grew to understand because of asking that question. It doesn't make everybody feel comfortable when you ask them why, but they need to understand. That's right. The whys. They need to understand. People ask, well, how did they get here anyway? Well, have you ever heard of the triangular slave trade? Let's talk about that. But one of the things I think was great that King talked about was his relationship with SNCC and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the book. And when James Meredith was in the hospital and Stokely Carmichael and Floyd McKissick came to visit, and he really talked about their push and how they started to see the movement. And I think about it, as Dennis said, you have the energy, the older people have the wisdom. King was saying, hey, let's look at this. Let's talk about what we're going to call the movement. And he was like, freedom now. They were like, no, we're calling it Black Power. And King was thinking like, I don't know, because that may alienate some people. Then I started thinking about connections today. Defund the police. Some people are saying, hey, defund the police. Detractors are saying, well, I understand the concept of it, but if you say defund the police, that makes me think my neighborhood is going to be unsafe. It's like, how is it that we come together and bridge that kind of thinking so that we create a movement, we synergize and create a movement and we have the passion, and we have to think through what the mechanics are. I support defund the police. I support Black Lives Matter. I support all of them. I'm like, hey, let's. I'm not going to say let's burn it down, but
as to why he's an activist and an advocate at the same time. So we only have a couple more minutes. One thing, Maddie, look, I always enjoy your questions. And as we are in a STEM environment, mechanical engineer, right? Whenever you're doing discovery of anything, we always ask 5 whys, because you're not going to get the answer on the first why. But when you're doing scientific discovery, when you're doing economic or community discovery, a discovery of yourself, by the time you get to that 5th why, you're going to get to the root, right? And from there, now you can, so the 5 whys help you drill down. Once you get down, now you can start building up.
Oh, that's good.
And you bring others along.
That's good.
Okay. So I got an amen corner.
5 whys in a few different places. So absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Always use the 5 whys and read as much as you possibly can. Right. And to continue to ask those questions, not just of yourself, your peer group, but also of others. Right. So we're literally like at time, but if look, just a couple more things, and I will end it. But what I want you all to do, James and Dennis, if you can just have some parting words around Black History Month, Black Excellence, Martin Luther King's books, and some of the manuscripts in which you've talked about. But what would be your parting words for today?
I think I would like to just, again, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'd like to just think about how all of our lives really do matter. But the reason we say Black Lives Matter is particularly because you want to put the energy where the energy needs to be, because obviously if Black lives matter, then every life really will matter. So we're just saying, don't be afraid of that, particularly in the month of February, but in all of the months. Just start looking at all lives mattering, but put your emphasis on the Black lives, because I think that's going to help us move to a society where everybody matters.
Absolutely. And it certainly matters, especially when you start talking about designing technology, artificial intelligence. Everyone needs to be around that table. James.
Yes. Well, just thank you for the opportunity. And certainly through this discussion and the national and international discussions you're seeing, we understand very much so why it's important for us to study, for us to study Black history. And particularly, we have been a marginalized group of people, and there's stuff that, and I think Slaughter said read, or maybe Tina said read everything. There are things that I discover every day about the contributions of African-American people. And again, ask those questions. You know, we're in that space that there are so many contributions. We have to highlight all of them, because representation matters, as we say. You know, it's great when we talk about coronavirus vaccines and have Dr. Fauci paraded across the screen, but we also have to talk about Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, and how she helped to develop the vaccine. So those are things that are really important to us as we think about where we go from here, chaos or community. I think that's what we have to decide. That's what you have to decide as young people. And I hope that as you think through it, you really think about the global community, as I always say, and how is it that the global community changes the world through our actions and through our support for each other. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
I can't thank you enough. There is something that I do want to read from the book that hopefully will summarize some of the things that we've been talking about. And if anyone has the book, it's on page 181. Quite a few things here, but Dr. King says, one of the great problems of mankind is that we suffer from a poverty of spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and our technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. Every man lives in two realms, the internal and the external. The internal is that the realm has spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. The external is the complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instruments by which we live our lives. So I would end on that to say, STEM can be just as political, just as racial. It highlights the opportunities though. So Maddie put in your comments, equity versus equality. And those are the basis of STEM today, where we want to make sure marginalized groups are a part of it, because it's going to change the trajectory of our economy and our civilization if we don't include everyone, and particularly those of color. So I want to thank you both today. Hopefully this has been a eye-opening, provocative conversations for everyone to start thinking about this in a very different way. We are live streaming this on our YouTube page. And one, we just want to make sure that everyone follows us. There's going to be, it feels like there's going to be a part 2 to this. I think that we need to move outside of Black History Month and also talk about the excellence of people of color around the globe in other months. So if you all wouldn't mind joining us on another discussion, we'll certainly be honored to have you both. And also we have next month some other events that's coming up. If you can advance the slides, please. So we will be sending this out. Make sure that you fill out the survey, give us some feedback. We want to make sure that we're bringing relevant content for all people, because that's how you learn and grow. And we're going to have different people on to make sure, again, you have a different lens and perspective in how you view the world. I want to make sure you remember, this is our Black History Month Wellness Challenge. So we talk about not just the body, but also of the mind. We have a playlist out there. So if you can do 1 mile, 1 mile makes a huge difference in your overall health. So, sign up, join, do your 1 mile, and you'll get an opportunity to be able to win either a Spotify or a Apple 1-year subscription. Just by taking, yes, that's right, Dr. Slaughter, 1-year subscription, but you have to follow the rules and you have to participate. And again, when we talk about Dr. Slaughter, when you talk about being courageous, we have an African-American female, one of the first executives for Capital Broadcast. She was in the television industry, just retired recently. She's in her 70s. She's going to join us for another provocative and powerful discussion next month. So this is Evelyn Smith Booker. She has her book out. So make sure, again, sign up, participate, but more importantly, I can't thank you both enough for coming on today and providing some much needed insight and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Sure is hot out here. No, I don't mind though. Just glad to be free.